That brings us to the double reaction to pain. There are two possible ways of enduring pain. As Stevenson expressed two ways of looking out of prison bars. Two men looked out through prison bars. The one saw mud, the other stars.
Travel along, Catholic pilgrims, for 1 year as we learn from Venerable Fulton Sheen, one of the greatest Catholic teachers in modern times. Join me, Amy Thomas, once a week for a short reading out of Bishop Sheens' book, Way to Inner Peace. Hello, Catholic pilgrims. Welcome to week 15. So, do you have a pessimistic attitude or an optimistic attitude? Well, I sadly have to confess that I tend towards a very pessimistic attitude. I know that might sound shocking to you. It's something that I really have to work on very hard. I don't know if it's because I come from a family that tends towards pessimism, at least one side of my family. I don't know, but it's definitely something that I tend towards, and I really struggle to not be pessimistic about a lot of things. However, I have a child, my oldest, who is probably the most optimistic, upbeat person the world has ever known. And so I look at her sometimes when I'm just being grumpy and rude to everyone, and she takes it all and handles it all. And I'm a little envious of her ability to just be so optimistic all the time. And I think a lot of it has to do with some lessons that my husband has taught our kids through the years that I didn't necessarily get when I was growing up. But either way, this week, what we are going to talk about is our moods. And so 3 points I want you to think about as we're reading along are dispositions, control, and excuses. Number 15. Our moods. Our blessed Lord advised us, when you fast, do not be sad or wear a long face as the hypocrites do. Then he cautioned his hearers to so dress themselves that no one would know they were fasting. Sadness is atheistic. It is not Christian. It is atheistic not only because it shows a lack of faith, leaving one with no invisible means of support, but also because it robs one of hope as day adds to day and the lease on life runs out. Many who have an empty stomach or a trial on the inside placard it on their faces, register it in their voices, and show it in their actions. Their disposition is either morose, taciturn, moody, grouchy, bitter, or sharp. In a word, they are sad. All has not gone well at the office or in the factory. The husband returns and answers his wife in monosyllables, if he answers her at all. The phone rings and a customer is at the other end. All is sweetness and light. This disproves those who say that bad humor is really not our fault at all. It is due to getting up on the wrong side of the bed, or my rheumatism is bothering me today, or my corn hurts and I know it is going to rain. These excuses are the same as those given in universities for sins, such as blaming it on our genes, or on society, or on the stars. The truth of the matter is, as Shakespeare says, the fault is not in our stars, but in ourselves. External circumstances may condition our mental outlook and our dispositions, but they do not cause them. Just as there is a right and wrong theory about the sun and the earth, so there is a right and wrong theory about external circumstances. If we revolve about what happens on the outside, then the latter determines our moods and attitudes. But if we make what is external revolve around us, we can determine the amount of their influence. Either what is outside makes our moods, or our moods determine our outlook on what is outside us. The pot that overboils can boil over the temper. Or the temper can see the pot overboil and not get mad. Continuing that figure, it may be said that there are some people who, in a quarrel, love to keep the pot boiling. Rainy days do make some people sad, but the author remembers saying once to a resident of Killarney, "Too bad it's raining," he answered, "but it's a good day to save your soul." Come to think about it, it may be easier to do that on rainy days than on sunny days. Our humor and disposition are not so much the reflection of the weather or the wrong side of the bed as they are the reflections of the state of our soul. What is outside of us is beyond our control, but what is within us can be mastered and woven to any desired pattern. As Pascal once said, "Time and my moods have little relationship. I have my fogs and my bad weather within me." Our personal dispositions are as window panes through which we see the world either as rosy or dull. The way we color the glasses we wear is the way the world seems to us. To a great extent, what we see is colored from the inside rather than from the outside. Two considerations are helpful in developing a good disposition. The first is to be mindful that a happy conscience makes a happy outlook on life, and an unhappy conscience makes us miserable on the inside and everyone else miserable on the outside. When our conscience bothers us, whether we admit it or not, we often try to justify it by correcting others or by finding fault with them. The readiness to believe evil about others is in a large part ammunition for 1,000 scandals in our own hearts. But by finding black spots in others, they believe they distract attention from their own miserable state. The good conscience, on the contrary, finds good in others even when there is some discontent with self. The second aid to good humor is the spirit of joy. Joy is rejoicing in another's progress. This is one of the rarest virtues and the last to be won. Too often, the progress of others is regarded as stolen from self. A man loses his good humor when he calls his wife dear when they are out, and ox when at home. The wife loses her joy when she would rather spend her time mending her ways than mending his socks. All have joy when they thank God that their friends have done good work, that they are loved by others, and that their virtues proclaim the joy of a good conscience. I wish I had his ability to pack 1,000,000 points into a couple of paragraphs. He was so good at that. Such a good writer, such a good speaker. He has such interesting and creative ways of getting his point across that is unique to him. You don't often see his style of writing or talking anymore today, and it's just what I really love about him and why I connect with him so much is because it really does make you think. And as I was reading through our readings this week, it really made me think about my disposition and how much control I really do have over it. So I do want to walk through this one and just talk about experiences I've had in my own life and with other people and just work our way through it. And I really invite you to think about your mood and maybe the excuses that you give for the moods that you're in. And just remember as we are going through this, that our moods are within our control. And that's something that I had to learn a long time ago, and I still have to continue to practice it nearly every day. So let's just start at the beginning here. And I want to move down into the second paragraph. He's talking about a husband coming home from work, and he says, "All has not gone well at the office or in the factory. The husband returns and answers his wife in monosyllables, if he answers her at all. The phone rings and a customer is at the other end. All is sweetness and light." And now this kind of made me laugh because when I was younger and I would go to visit my mom at work, and she would be getting after me about something, and she would have, her mama voice on. And the phone would ring, and she was the city manager's secretary, and she would answer it with this super sweet voice. And, she would just be griping at me, and she would pick up the phone, and she would say, "City manager's office, Marcia Ashford speaking." And I would kind of stare at her and be like, what are you doing? You were just biting my head off, and now you're a totally different person, and you totally are being two-faced right now. That's what my teenager self said, but obviously she couldn't answer the phone, super grumpy, but it made me laugh kind of thinking about that when I read this first part. But in all seriousness, it is true. And I've seen this within myself. I'll be at home with my kids and I will be snapping at them and, being really impatient with them. And then we go out in public and there's other people's kids around me or just other people around, and I will be this totally different person, just super nice, super patient with these people's kids, put on this face. It's the face that I think we all kind of tend to put on. But the point of him telling this is that he says, this flip-flop, this switch, this face that we put on, he says this disproves those who say that bad humor is really not our fault at all. Oh, it's due to getting up on the wrong side of the bed, or I've got some pain in my foot or something like that. But no, if we're able to make that switch, then it really is in our control. It's not something else. Because there have been times in my life when I am extremely mad or upset and I'm not able to switch the face. I'm not able to switch my mood so fast because I am so sad or so very angry. And so I will lash out at other people. At that point, I'm letting my moods control me. But at other times, if I'm treating my family one way in the house and then going out and being all super nice, when I go out in public, obviously that's in my control. Because if I was really just angry or really just sad, I just wouldn't be able to help it. And so I think that's something very important. As I was reading through that, it was very convicting because in a way it's kind of sad that, I am that way at home, especially with my children, if they're, getting on my nerves and doing things I don't like, but then I can go out and put on this face as if everything is okay and I'm doing perfect and everything's perfect. That's not okay. And, I don't want to go out and be grumpy to other people, but I think it really shows me that when I'm at home, I'm not being as in control of my moods as I should be, probably because the people in my family are familiar. And I should be still treating them with absolute love and respect and controlling my moods. So let's move on from there. Over to the next page, he says, if we revolve about what happens on the outside, then the latter determines our moods and attitudes. But if we make what is external revolve around us, we can determine the amount of their influence. So when I was, first starting out after college, I worked with this lady who was the grumpiest person I have ever met in my entire life. She had kind of a boring job, and I was kind of her helpmate for the summer. They didn't really need me, but I was there anyway. And her job was kind of menial, kind of not that important, I would say. I mean, it was important, but it had a level of stagnation about it. Her situation, her external situation with her job totally controlled her inner mood. And she was just grumpy all the time. She was rude to everyone. She never said anything nice, nothing. And it was really hard working with her. And I just was bound and determined to help her change her personality a little bit or change her mood. And so I just wouldn't give into it. I wouldn't react negatively to her. I would kind of deflect, all of her grumpiness and her rude comments and everything. And I tried to talk to her about things that I knew she did like. She liked cooking. She liked music a lot. And so I would try to talk to her about those things. And in those moments, her mood would change and she would kind of brighten up. And that allowed me kind of an in to talk to her about come to work with a good attitude and, come and want to do the best that you possibly can do. And over time, her attitude did start to change. And, funny enough, she started bringing food to eat, and we started playing music in the office. And, she learned that she didn't have to come to this kind of mundane job so grumpy, that she could change the environment and make it something more enjoyable for her and for others. It was a really good example in not revolving around your external circumstances, but instead having the external circumstances revolve around you. So let's move on down the page. On the last paragraph on page 53, he says down at the bottom, our humor and disposition are not so much the reflection of the weather or the wrong side of the bed as they are the reflections of the state of our soul. What is outside of us is beyond our control, but what is within us can be mastered and woven to any desired pattern. Gosh, this is so much of what I had to learn during my late teenage years and into my 20s. I was sunk. I was sunk over what had happened, the abuse I had suffered through, and I revolved. I revolved around those external circumstances. And I completely and utterly allowed those horrible external circumstances to control my mood. And so I was sad, and I was rude, and I was bitter, and I was sharp, and I was all the things that he mentioned. Just morose and unable to have joy. And what was frustrating me so much during that time was wanting to go back to the past and fix that external circumstance or the external circumstances. I daydreamed about being able to go back and fix those things. And if I could do that, then everything would be okay. But the thing is that external circumstances are beyond our control. Bad things are going to happen to us. Bad things are going to happen in the world. And sometimes there's just absolutely nothing that we can do about it. Now, granted, sometimes when we choose to sin, bad things happen, and that's on us. But the external things that go on where other people's sins really affect us, that is beyond our control. And as much as we would like to live in a utopia, man, we do not. And so what we have to realize is that how we react to the external circumstance is in our control. And that was what I needed to learn. And where he says, what is within us can be mastered and woven into any desired pattern. And when I was counseling victims of domestic and sexual violence, this was something I was trying to get across to them. The bad thing has happened to you. That is out of your control. There is nothing you can do to take it away, to make it right, nothing. But what you do have control of is how you react right now. And that gives you all the power, because you don't have to continue to let the bad thing have control over your life. Once I learned that, that was a game changer. And again, it doesn't mean that the bad thing doesn't affect you, or it doesn't still make you sad, or that you don't wish it didn't happen. But you learn that from here on out, I'm in control. I am in control of how I respond in my life. And if I continue to let the external circumstances, the bad things that happen to me, drag me down, then they are still winning. They are still affecting my life. And I'm just giving those circumstances power every day, all over again. It doesn't change until I say, no, I'm taking control here, and I'm going to change the way I look at my life. So let's flip the page now. Like I said at the beginning, I tend to be a pessimistic person. Now, I have a pretty good sense of humor. It can tend to be sarcastic and, kind of snarky. I do laugh at myself a lot because I'm very clumsy, and I always get myself in situations that are pretty funny. So in that regard, I do have a pretty good, healthy sense of humor. And it's not that I don't like to have fun or anything like that, but when things start to look bad or bleak, like the state of our country, or if I'm worried about people in my family, my mind and my mood tends to go to, what's the worst that's going to happen? This is the worst. This is the bad thing. Everything's going to hell in a handbasket. The end is near. All is lost. That is how I tend to go. And I'm not quite sure why. Like I said at the beginning, there's a side of my family that tends to be kind of pessimistic. I love them to death, and it's not as if I don't have a good relationship with them, but that's kind of their mindset. It's very doomsday. This is the worst. Nothing's ever going to be good again. And so I don't know if that's just something that I picked up and carried with me. I just don't know, honestly. However, I do know that about myself, and so it's something that I do try to work on. However, there are times when I'm exactly the person that he's talking about, where he says, some people who in a quarrel love to keep the pot boiling, that would be me. That would be me. I do have a temper, and I tend to want to keep stoking the fire sometimes. I have gotten better. My husband has helped me become better in that area of my life. But something that's been very eye-opening for me is, through the years as my husband and I have been raising our kids, my husband has taught our kids that anytime they, start to get a bad attitude or a woe is me, or, they're just being grumpy or doing the whole pessimistic thing, my husband has always taught them that they need to fix their attitude. And me, when I first heard this, I was like, it's not that easy. You can't just fix your attitude. And he would tell them, and he still does tell them, put a smile on your face, let it roll off your back, change your attitude. You have control. And nearly every time I see my kids just take control of their bad mood and turn it into a positive one. Nearly every single time. And I've watched them and I'm like, wow, it can be done just like that. They just do it. They just take control and do it. And that's not to say that my husband doesn't allow them to, be upset about something, or, he's asking them to stuff their feelings down. But if they're getting to a point where it's consuming them, controlling them, he just tells them, hey, fix your attitude. And they do. And it's impressive, because then we just go on and we start enjoying things again. But me, if I get that way, one of my kids will come up and be like, Mom, you need to, change your attitude, just change it. And I'll be like, I don't want to change it. And they're like, well, you should. And I just want to be mad. I guess it's because, I just didn't grow up learning that. But it is something that I do have in my mind. And when I do start to feel annoyed or impatient or angry or irritated, I do try to remind myself, fix your attitude. You have control over whether or not this continues down a bad path and everybody is miserable, or you have control to make this go down a good path and we can get back on track and the day can go on. So let's go to the two things that he talks about on how to have a good disposition. And he says the first is to be mindful that a happy conscience makes a happy outlook on life, and an unhappy conscience makes us miserable on the inside and everyone else miserable on the outside. And that's so true. And that's why confession is so important for us to go to, because we can get those things that are bothering us off our souls and not be weighted down with the guilt and the shame of it all. Because guilt and shame really do sink us down into dark pits. And so that is why the sacrament of confession is so important. Jesus knew it was so important. That's why he gave it to us. That's why he instituted it in the Catholic Church. It's because it's a place where we can go, get that stuff off our soul, and have a happy conscience again. Because just like he says, when our conscience is sunk, we are going to sink down with it, and everybody else around us is going to follow into the quicksand and be sunk as well. And we don't want that. We don't want to be those kind of people. The second thing he says is the second aid to good humor is the spirit of joy. Joy is rejoicing in another's progress. This is one of the rarest virtues and the last to be won. Yes, it is so true. If we can look around at other people, at our family members, at our siblings, even our spouse, if we can look at them and be so grateful and thankful that, like he says, that they are doing good work, that they are loved by others, and that they are practicing virtues, and not worry that that's taking away from our light or our shine, but just to be so grateful and thankful that they are out there doing good things. If we can do that, we will have joy within us. That's such a key component of joy, is relishing and delighting in other people finding their God-given self, finding that potential, and not being envious of it or jealous or anything like that, but looking at them and saying, yes, I am so happy that you are on the path that God wants you to be on. And I'm so grateful that you are successful in that way. And I am going to, cheer you on. I think that really helps us be grateful people. And it takes our minds off of ourselves, trying to be the one that shines all the light and is the best in everything. When we congratulate other people, when we delight in their successes and their wins, it helps us to be humble. And it reminds us that, we're not the only person in the world who can do good things. And we should want people to do good things. And I think if we keep that in mind, it can really help change our mood and our disposition and all of that. So, really good things to keep in mind as we go through our days. Just remembering that we have control, and not to make excuses for our pitiful, moods sometimes. Of course, obviously, there are always, bad things that happen to us, and definitely things that will make us sad, will make us angry. But it's up to us how we respond. And we don't want to respond with, that atheistic attitude that he talked about at the beginning, which is just sadness and just watching day after day tick away and not really living. But instead, we want to have that very Christian attitude where we can take those external circumstances that happen that are not so good and continue to have joy during those moments. We may not feel amazing, but we don't have to make, our sphere around us be one that makes other people miserable. So that is all for this week, Catholic Pilgrims. I will see you back here for week 16. And until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.